Hey there, friends. Before we dive into this super cool story, I want you to do something fun. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from today. Maybe you're in a big city, a small town, or somewhere totally awesome. Oh, and if you love stories where the little guy wins big, make sure to hit that subscribe button. It's like giving this story a high five. Now, here's a question to get you thinking. Have you ever been treated unfairly by someone who didn't know the real you? Maybe they judged you too fast, like they thought they had you all figured out. Well, hold on tight because this story is going to blow your mind. It was a bright, sunny morning in a place called Pinewood Estates. This wasn't just any neighborhood, it was super fancy. The houses were huge, with shiny windows and perfect green lawns that looked like they belonged in a magazine. Every driveway had a sparkly car, and the mailboxes were so neat they almost looked fake. But here's the thing, the people in Pinewood. Some of them had egos even bigger than their giant houses. They walked around acting like they were the kings and queens of the world. In the middle of all this fanciness lived a guy named Jake Miller. Now, if you saw Jake walking down the street, you'd probably think, oh, he's just a regular dude. He wore plain sneakers, a comfy t-shirt, and a baseball cap that was a little worn out. His hair was messy in a cool way, and he always had a big smile. Every morning, Jake would grab a leash and take his dog Max for a walk. Max was the fluffiest dog you've ever seen, like a walking cloud with a wagging tail. His fur was golden and soft, and his big brown eyes made everyone go, "Awa." Jake and Max were best buddies. They'd stroll through Pinewood, waving at neighbors, saying hi to kids riding bikes, and just enjoying the sunshine. But here's the big secret. Jake wasn't as ordinary as he seemed. Nope, not even close. Deep down, he was hiding something so huge it could shake up the whole neighborhood. It was like a surprise gift wrapped in plain paper. Nobody knew what was inside, but it was going to change everything. Jake didn't brag about it. He didn't tell anyone. He just kept it tucked away, waiting for the right moment. And trust me, that moment was coming, even if nobody saw it yet. Now let's talk about the person who was about to make things really interesting. Her name was Karen, and she was the president of the Pinewood Homeowners Association, or the HOA as everyone called it. The HOA was like a club that made rules for the neighborhood. They decided things like what color you could paint your house or how tall your grass could grow. Karen loved being in charge. She walked around with a clipboard clutched tight in her hands like it was her best friend. Her hair was always pulled back in a super tight bun, and her lips were usually pressed into a thin line like she was mad at the world. But the scariest thing about Karen, her glare. Oh man, that glare could stop you in your tracks. It was so fierce it could probably scare a grizzly bear right out of the woods. Karen had a rule for everything. If your garbage can was out too long, she'd write you a note. If your flowers weren't perfect, she'd give you a warning. And if she didn't like something, watch out, she'd make sure everyone knew it. Most people in Pinewood were a little afraid of her. They'd see her coming and hurry inside, hoping she wouldn't notice them. But Jake, he wasn't scared. He'd just smile and wave, even when Karen gave him her meanest look. That made her even madder, but Jake didn't care. He had Max, his trusty dog, and that was enough for him. See, Jake loved Pinewood, even with all its fancy rules and grumpy Karens. He liked the way the trees turned red and gold in the fall. He liked how kids laughed and played in the park. And he loved how Max would run in circles, chasing butterflies like it was the best game ever. But Karen, she didn't see things the same way. To her, Jake and Max were just a problem waiting to happen. She'd watch them walk by, her eyes narrowing like she was trying to find something wrong. And let me tell you, she was always looking for something to complain about. One morning, as Jake and Max strolled down the sidewalk, Karen was out on her usual patrol. She wore a bright yellow vest like she was a police officer or something. Her clipboard was ready and her pen was practically itching to write someone a fine. Jake saw her coming and gave her a friendly nod. "Morning, Karen," he called out. Max wagged his tail, his tongue hanging out in a big doggy grin, but Karen didn't smile back. She stopped right in front of them, her arms crossed. "Your dog's too big for this neighborhood," she said, her voice sharp like a teacher scolding a kid. Jake tilted his head, still smiling. "Max, he's the friendliest pup around. He wouldn't hurt a fly." Karen huffed like she didn't believe him. "I don't care. Dogs like that cause trouble. I'm keeping an eye on you, Jake." Then she turned and marched off, her clipboard bouncing with every step. Jake watched her go, his smile fading just a tiny bit. He patted Max's head and whispered, "Don't worry, buddy. She doesn't know who we are." And that was the thing. Karen had no idea. She thought Jake was just some guy with a dog. She thought she could boss him around, make him follow her rules, maybe even push him out of Pinewood if she tried hard enough. But Jake wasn't worried. He wasn't mad either. He was just waiting for Karen to push too far, waiting for the moment when he'd show everyone what he was really made of. The neighbors didn't know Jake's secret either. They saw him as the nice guy who always stopped to chat. Mrs. Lopez, who lived next door, would give him cookies sometimes. Mr. Carter down the street liked to talk about baseball with him. The kids loved Max. They'd giggle and pet him until their parents called them inside. But nobody knew the truth. Nobody knew that Jake was more than just a guy with a dog. He was like a superhero hiding in plain sight, and his powers were about to surprise everyone. As Jake and Max walked back home that morning, the sun was climbing higher in the sky. Birds chirped and a soft breeze rustled the leaves. It felt like a perfect day, but there was a tiny spark of something in the air. Something big was coming. Jake could feel it, even if nobody else could. Karen's mean words were just the start. She thought she was in control, but she was about to learn something she'd never forget. And Jake, he was ready to let his secret out one step at a time. So what was Jake hiding? Why wasn't he scared of Karen? And what was going to happen when the truth finally came out? Those questions hung in the air like a mystery waiting to be solved. Pinewood Estates was about to get a big surprise, and it all started with a guy, a dog, and a lady with a clipboard who thought she knew everything. Stick around, because this story's only getting started, and trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. Jake loved Pinewood Estates with all his heart. It was a beautiful place with tall trees, colorful flowers, and houses that looked like they belonged in a fairy tale. Every morning, he'd walk his fluffy dog, Max, and feel happy just being there. The kids playing in the park made him smile, and the way the sun shone through the leaves felt like magic. But not everyone in Pinewood was as nice as the neighborhood looked. One person in particular made things tough for Jake, and her name was Karen. Karen wasn't just any neighbor. She was the president of the Homeowners Association, or HOA for short. That meant she got to make rules for everyone in Pinewood, and boy did she love making rules. Karen walked around like she was the queen of the whole world. Every day she'd march up and down the streets holding a big clipboard like it was a shield. Her eyes were sharp, always looking for something wrong. If your grass was too long, she'd write you a note. If your bike was in the driveway, she'd leave a warning. And if you did anything she didn't like, oh, you'd hear about it. Karen had a loud voice, and she wasn't afraid to use it. No loud music, she'd yell at kids playing outside. No messy yards, she'd scold anyone with a leaf out of place. But her favorite rule of all, no dogs off leash, she'd say it over and over like it was the most important thing in the world. Jake always followed that rule. He kept Max on a leash every single time they went for a walk. Max was a good dog, wagging his tail and never causing trouble. But that didn't matter to Karen. Whenever she saw Jake and Max, she'd stare at them like they'd just robbed a bank. Her eyes would narrow and her mouth would twist into a frown like she was already planning to make their day harder. One sunny afternoon, Jake was walking Max down the street like usual. Max's golden fur bounced as he trotted along, sniffing flowers and chasing the occasional butterfly. Jake hummed a little tune, feeling good about the day. But then out of nowhere, Karen appeared. She stomped toward them, her face as red as a ripe tomato. Her clipboard was in one hand and her other hand was on her hip like she was ready for a fight. "Jake," she snapped, her voice so loud it made a bird fly out of a nearby tree. "Your dog is a nuisance." Jake stopped walking and looked at her, a little surprised. "Max, a nuisance," he said, raising an eyebrow. "He's the friendliest pup around. He loves everyone." Karen crossed her arms tight across her chest. "I don't care," she said, her words sharp like a bee's sting. "Dogs like that are too big for this neighborhood. They don't belong here." Those words hit Jake hard, like a punch he didn't see coming. Max wasn't just any dog, he was Jake's best friend. They'd been through so much together, and Jake knew Max was special. Hearing Karen talk about him like he was some kind of problem made Jake's heart hurt, but he didn't let it show. Instead, he gave Karen a small smile, the kind you give when you're trying to stay calm. "Okay, Karen," he said softly. "We'll keep doing our best." Then he patted Max's head and walked away, his sneakers quiet on the sidewalk. As Jake and Max headed home, Karen's words echoed in his mind. "Too big, don't belong here. It wasn't fair." Max hadn't done anything wrong. He didn't bark at people. He didn't dig up gardens. He just loved to walk and play and make people smile. But Karen didn't care about that. She only cared about her rules and being the boss. Jake wasn't mad, not yet anyway. He was more like disappointed. He wished Karen could see how great Max was, but deep down he knew something else. Karen had no idea who she was dealing with. Jake wasn't just some guy with a dog. He was watching her, noticing every mean thing she did, and he was waiting. See, Jake had a secret, a big one. Nobody in Pinewood knew it, not even the neighbors who waved at him every day. Karen thought she could push him around because she thought he was ordinary, but Jake was far from ordinary. He was like a puzzle with a piece missing, and Karen was about to find out what that piece was. Every time she glared at him, every time she said something mean, she was stepping closer to a surprise she'd never expect. The next day, things got worse. Jake woke up to find a piece of paper taped to his front door. It was a note from the HOA written in Karen's neat, angry handwriting. "Warning," it said, "your dog has been reported for disturbing the neighborhood. Keep him under control or face a fine." Jake read the note and shook his head. Disturbing the neighborhood. Max had been sleeping on the porch all morning. The only thing he disturbed was a squirrel that got too close to his water bowl. Now Jake crumpled the note and tossed it in the trash. "Don't worry, Max," he said, scratching his dog's ears. "She's just trying to scare us." But Karen wasn't done. Later that week, she stopped Jake again while he was walking Max. This time, she had a neighbor with her, Mr. Jenkins, an older man who always looked nervous around Karen. "See," Karen said, pointing at Max. "This dog is a problem. Tell him, Mr. Jenkins." Mr. Jenkins shuffled his feet and mumbled, "Well, he's pretty big." Jake could tell Mr. Jenkins didn't really mean it. He was just scared of Karen like most people in Pinewood. Jake didn't blame him. Karen had a way of making everyone feel small. "Karen," Jake said, keeping his voice calm, "Max hasn't done anything wrong. Maybe you should check with the other neighbors. They love him." Karen's face got even redder, if that was possible. "I don't need to check," she barked. "I'm in charge here, and I say that dog's trouble. You'd better watch out, Jake." Then she spun around and marched off, dragging poor Mr. Jenkins with her. Jake watched her go, his smile fading just a little. Max looked up at him, his big eyes full of trust. "It's okay, buddy," Jake whispered. "She doesn't know what's coming." That night, Jake sat on his porch thinking. Karen was getting meaner every day, and it wasn't just about Max anymore. She was trying to make Jake feel like he didn't belong in Pinewood, but Jake wasn't going anywhere. He loved his home, his dog, and his life, and he wasn't going to let Karen ruin it. He leaned back in his chair, looking at the stars twinkling above. Karen thought she had all the power, but Jake knew something she didn't. He wasn't just watching and waiting, he was ready. Ready for the moment when everything would change. Karen's mean words and angry glares were piling up, like a tower of blocks about to fall. She thought she could keep pushing, but every step she took was bringing her closer to a big surprise. Jake wasn't mad, but he was done being quiet. Something was brewing in Pinewood Estates, and it was going to be bigger than anyone could imagine. Days went by in Pinewood Estates, and things weren't getting any better for Jake and his fluffy dog Max. If anything, they were getting worse, way worse. Karen, the HOA president with her scary clipboard, was on a mission to make Jake's life tough. She wasn't just glaring at him anymore or saying mean things about Max. Nope, she was taking it to a whole new level. One morning, Jake opened his front door and found a piece of paper taped right there, flapping in the breeze. It was a fine from the HOA, written in Karen's neat, angry handwriting. Dog-related disturbances, it said in big, bold letters. Pay $50 or face consequences. Jake read the note and scratched his head. Disturbances? Max hadn't done anything. Sure, he liked to chase his tail sometimes or sniff every bush on their walks, but he wasn't loud or naughty. Max was the kind of dog who'd rather nap in the sun than cause trouble. Jake looked at Max, who was sprawled out on the porch, his tongue hanging out like he didn't have a care in the world. "What did you do, buddy?" Jake said with a little laugh. "Steal a squirrel's acorn." He crumpled the paper and tossed it in the trash, but deep down, he felt a tiny knot in his stomach. Karen wasn't playing around anymore. The neighbors saw the fine, too. They started whispering when Jake walked by with Max. "Did you hear?" Mrs. Lopez said to Mr. Carter, her voice low. "Karen's after Jake's dog again." Mr. Carter shook his head, looking worried. "She's got it out for him," he muttered. But nobody said anything to Karen. They were too scared. Karen had a way of making people feel like they'd get in trouble just for talking to her. So they kept quiet, watching from their windows as Karen marched around, her clipboard ready to strike. Jake noticed the whispers, but he didn't let them bother him. He stayed calm, like a duck floating on a pond, smooth on top, even if his feet were paddling hard underneath. He was starting to see things about Karen, little clues that made him think. Like how she never checked her facts before she got mad. That fine on his door, it didn't say what Max had done wrong, no barking, no digging, nothing. It was like Karen just made it up because she felt like it. Another thing Jake noticed was how Karen loved to brag. She'd stand in the park, talking loud so everyone could hear. "I'm keeping Pinewood perfect," she'd say, puffing out her chest. "No messy dogs or lazy people allowed." Jake heard her once and raised an eyebrow. Perfect, he thought. Sounds like she just wants to be the boss. But Karen's bragging wasn't the only thing Jake was watching. He was paying attention to everything, every mean look, every sharp word. He was quiet about it, though. He didn't argue or yell back. He just kept walking Max, waving at kids and acting like nothing was wrong. But inside, Jake was thinking hard. He wasn't going to let Karen push him around forever. He had a secret, something big that nobody in Pinewood knew. And every time Karen did something mean, she was getting closer to finding out what it was. One afternoon, things took a wild turn. Jake and Max were out for their usual walk, enjoying the warm sun. Max was trotting along, his leash loose, when a squirrel darted across the path. It was a fat little squirrel, zooming like it was late for a party. Max couldn't help himself. He let out one big happy bark and tugged at the leash, his tail wagging like crazy. Jake laughed and pulled him back gently. "Easy, Max," he said. "That squirrel's too fast for you." It was no big deal, just a dog being a dog. But guess who was watching from across the street? Yup, Karen. She stormed over, her face redder than a fire truck. Her clipboard was in her hand, and she was waving it like a flag. "That's it," she yelled, so loud the whole neighborhood could hear. "I've had enough of that dog." Neighbors poked their heads out of windows, and a few kids on bikes stopped to stare. Jake turned to face her, still holding Max's leash. Max sat down, tilting his head like he was confused. Karen pointed at him, her fingers shaking. "Your dog is out of control," she shouted. "I'm banning him from Pinewood." The word banning hit the air like a thunderclap. Neighbors gasped. Mrs. Lopez dropped her garden hose and Mr. Carter's jaw fell open. Banning Max, that was huge. It meant Max wouldn't be allowed to live in Pinewood anymore. Jake would have to move or give up his best friend. The kids on bikes looked worried, their eyes big. Max was their favorite dog. They loved petting him and sneaking him treats. How could Karen do this? Jake didn't say anything at first. He just knelt beside Max, stroking his soft fur. Max looked up at him, his brown eyes calm and trusting. "Don't worry, buddy," Jake whispered, so quiet only Max could hear. "She's about to learn something big." Then he stood up, facing Karen. His face was calm, but his eyes had a spark, like a fire starting to grow. "Karen," he said, his voice steady. Max barked once. "He's on a leash. He's not hurting anyone." Karen didn't listen. She crossed her arms and smirked. "Doesn't matter," she said. "I make the rules here and I say he's gone." She turned to the neighbors, expecting them to nod and agree. But nobody did. They just stood there, looking at Jake, then at Karen, then back at Jake. The air felt heavy, like something big was about to happen. Jake didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He just gave Karen a small nod like he was saying, "Okay, you do you." Then he walked away with Max, his steps slow and easy. But here's the thing, Jake wasn't giving up, not even close. That night when the stars were out and Pinewood was quiet, Jake sat on his porch and started making calls. They were quiet calls, the kind nobody heard. He spoke in a low voice, saying things like, "Yeah, it's time, and can you help me out?" Nobody knew who he was talking to, not even Max, who was snoozing at his feet. Jake wasn't just sitting back letting Karen win. He was planning something. Every mean thing Karen did, every fine, every yell, every threat was like a brick she was stacking up. She thought she was building a wall to keep Jake out, but really she was digging herself a deeper hole. Jake could see it, even if nobody else could. He noticed how Karen never asked questions or listened to anyone. He saw how she scared the neighbors into doing what she wanted. And he knew that kind of bossiness couldn't last forever. The neighbors were starting to notice things too. Little things, but they added up, like how Karen's rules were getting stricter every day. One kid got in trouble for flying a kite too high. A lady got a warning for planting pink flowers instead of red ones. People were tired of it, but they didn't know what to do. Jake saw their frowns and heard their sighs. He didn't say much, but he was thinking, watching, waiting. Karen thought she was in charge, but Jake knew better. She was about to trip over her own rules, and he was going to be ready when she did. The days in Pinewood Estates had been tense, like the air before a big storm. Karen, the HOA president, was on a mission to get rid of Jake's fluffy dog Max. She yelled written fines and told everyone Max was trouble. Jake stayed calm through it all, but he knew things couldn't go on like this. Something had to change, and it was about to happen in a way nobody expected. The next week, Karen called a big HOA meeting at the community center. It was a plain building with long tables, folding chairs, and a whiteboard where Karen liked to write her rules. She stood at the front, her clipboard in hand, looking prouder than ever. "We're voting to ban Jake's dog," she announced, her voice loud and sharp. A smirk spread across her face like she'd already won. "That mutt doesn't belong in Pinewood, and tonight we'll make it official." Neighbors shuffled into the room, their shoes squeaking on the shiny floor. There was Mrs. Lopez, who loved her garden, Mr. Carter, who always carried a newspaper. The kids from down the street came with their parents, whispering about Max. Nobody looked happy. They didn't want to vote against Jake, but Karen scared them. Her mean glares and loud voice made people nervous. They sat down, glancing at each other, unsure what to do. Some fiddled with their hands, others stared at the floor. The room felt heavy, like everyone was holding their breaths. Jake was the last to walk in. He moved slowly, his sneakers quiet on the floor. Max wasn't with him. Jake had left him at home, safe and cozy. Instead, Jake carried a leash in one hand and a plain brown folder in the other. The folder looked ordinary, like something you use for school papers. But there was something about the way Jake held it, steady and sure, that made a few neighbors tilt their heads. Karen saw him and rolled her eyes so hard it was a wonder they didn't fall out. "You can't save your mutt, Jake," she said, her voice dripping with confidence. "Sit down and be quiet." Jake didn't sit. He didn't say a word at first. He just stood there, tall and calm, like a tree that wouldn't bend in a storm. The neighbors watched him, their eyes flicking between him and Karen. The room was so quiet you could hear the clock ticking on the wall. Tick, tick, tick. Karen tapped her clipboard, impatient. "Well," she snapped, "what are you waiting for?" Jake took a deep breath and looked right at her. "Before you vote, Karen," he said, his voice clear and steady, "maybe you should know who I am." Those words hung in the air like a spark about to start a fire. The neighbors leaned forward in their chairs. Mrs. Lopez's eyes got wide. Mr. Carter put down his newspaper. Even the kids stopped whispering. "Who I am? What did that mean?" Everyone knew Jake. He was the nice guy with the fluffy dog, right? But the way he said it, so calm and strong, made them wonder. Karen laughed, but it wasn't a happy laugh. It was sharp, like she was trying to hide something. "Oh, please," she said, waving her hand. "You're just a nobody with a noisy dog." Jake didn't flinch. He stepped forward, his eyes locked on Karen's. The folder in his hand seemed heavier now, like it held something important. He opened it slowly, and the sound of the paper crinkling filled the room. Every neighbor was watching, their mouths half open. Jake pulled out a single photo and slid it across the table toward Karen. It landed right in front of her, shiny and bright under the community center's lights. Karen glanced at the photo and her smirk froze. Her eyes got big, then bigger, like she'd seen a ghost. The neighbors craned their necks, trying to see. Mrs. Lopez stood up to get a better look, and Mr. Carter pushed his glasses up his nose. Gasps filled the air, bouncing off the walls. The photo showed Jake, but not the Jake they saw every day. This Jake was on a TV set, standing in front of a big, colorful backdrop. He was surrounded by dogs, lots of dogs. There was a poodle doing a flip, a bulldog balancing a ball, and a tiny chihuahua waving at the camera. Jake was smiling, holding a microphone, looking like he owned the place. The room was buzzing now. Jake spoke again, his voice steady as a drum. "I'm Jake Miller," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I'm a celebrity dog trainer. Max isn't just my pet, he's a trained star who's been in movies. He's walked red carpets, done tricks on TV, and made people smile all over the world. And you, Karen, you're trying to ban a national treasure." The words hit like a thunderbolt. A national treasure? Max, the neighbors couldn't believe it. Mrs. Lopez clapped her hands over her mouth. Mr. Carter let out a low whistle. The kids bounced in their seats, giggling and pointing at the photo. "That's so cool," one of them shouted. The whole room seemed to light up, like someone had flipped a switch. People started clapping, their hands smacking together in a wave of noise. Some cheered, their voices loud and happy. Jake stood there still calm, but his eyes sparkled with pride. Karen's jaw dropped so low it nearly touched the floor. Her clipboard shook in her hands and her face turned red, then white, then red again, like a stoplight gone wild. She opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. It was like her brain had stopped working. She looked at the photo, then at Jake, then back at the photo. The smirk was gone. The confidence was gone. All that was left was a lady who just realized she made a huge mistake. Jake wasn't done. He took a step closer to the table, his voice strong but not mean. "I've been quiet, Karen," he said. "I didn't want trouble. I just wanted to live here with Max and be happy. But you've pushed too far. You've yelled, you find me, you've scared people. And now you're trying to take my best friend away. Max isn't going anywhere. Not today, not ever." The room exploded with cheers. Neighbors jumped to their feet, clapping so loud it echoed. The kids chanted, "Max, Max, Max," like they were at a ball game. Mrs. Lopez wiped a tear from her eye, smiling big. Mr. Carter nodded, like he'd known Jake was special all along. Even the quiet neighbors, the ones who never spoke up, were clapping now. It was like Pinewood had woken up and everyone was on Jake's side. Karen stood frozen, her clipboard hanging limp in her hand. She looked small now, like all her bossiness had leaked out. She thought Jake was just a regular guy, someone she could push around. She thought Max was just a dog, a problem she could get rid of. But she'd been wrong, so wrong. She messed with the wrong guy and now everyone knew it. Jake closed his folder and tucked it under his arm. He didn't smile or gloat. He just looked at Karen, his face saying, "This is over." The neighbors kept cheering, their voices filling the community center with joy. For the first time in a long time, Pinewood felt like a place where people could be happy, not scared. And it was all because Jake had stood up, shown his truth, and proved that Max was more than just a dog, he was a star. After that wild night at the HOA meeting, Pinewood Estates was a different place. It was like someone had opened all the windows and let fresh air blow through. Karen's big plan to ban Max, Jake's fluffy dog, had fallen apart right in front of everyone. When Jake showed that photo and told the room he was a celebrity dog trainer, it changed everything. The neighbors couldn't stop cheering, and Karen's mean smirk vanished like a popped bubble. Things moved fast after that, and for once, they moved in a good way. The HOA vote happened right there in the community center. Karen had wanted everyone to raise their hands to ban Max, but nobody did, not one person. Instead, hands shot up to keep Max right where he was, safe with Jake. Mrs. Lopez was the first, her hand high and proud. Mr. Carter followed, nodding like it was the easiest choice ever. Even the shy neighbors, the ones who usually stayed quiet, joined in. The kids bounced in their seats, giggling and clapping. Max stays. They chanted, their voices loud and happy. Karen stood at the front, her face red as a cherry, clutching her clipboard like it could save her. But it couldn't. The vote was clear. Max was staying, and Karen's big idea was done. That wasn't all. Karen's fines, the ones she'd slapped on Jake's door for dog disturbances, got tossed out like old trash. Someone, maybe Mr. Carter, stood up and said, "Those fines aren't fair. Max didn't do anything wrong." The neighbors nodded, and the HOA board agreed. They tore up the fine papers right then and there. Jake didn't say much, but his eyes twinkled like he was glad people were finally seeing the truth.